Hello, it's Shandra, and welcome back to Sunshine on a Dime, the travel podcast bringing you resources, tips, and stories from my travel experiences to help make your travel dreams a reality. All right, welcome back to another Sunday. Coincidentally, as we are recording this, it's also Sunday, so I feel like I'm saying it as we're doing it. It's funny, as I was walking to the studio today, I realized it's so fitting that I am recording today because I am coming wearing this outfit that I brought on my travels this summer. And I don't know about you guys, if you are backpackers out there and you know the feeling of like bringing an outfit on your travels that you absolutely like loved, and then after a couple months of wearing it, you were like, I never want to see this outfit again. This is me with these green pants. I don't know if you've seen them, probably plastered all over my social medias. I ended up wearing them all the time when I was traveling this summer, and I came home to Oregon, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to look at these pants for a very, very long time. I still love them, but like, no. And I realized when I came back to Oregon that I have all of my clothing in Boston. So these pants were just straight up worn for like 4 months straight, and then came back to Boston, all new wardrobe, and here we are, still wearing the pants. So I guess if you love something, you're just gonna keep wearing it. Yeah. But as you heard in the last episode that we just came out with, and if you've been following some of our socials, I spent about a month this summer couchsurfing through Israel. And I feel like a lot of people have a different kind of expectation or definition for what couchsurfing is. So I kind of want to just start out by like clarifying my definition, and we can kind of go out from there. So when I say couchsurfing, I mean quite literally staying with people while you're traveling, like very basic definition. This doesn't even necessarily need to be a couch. The idea behind it is pretty much if someone has an extra couch, if they have an extra room, sometimes it's even just an extra floor, like you have a potential place to sleep. And if you're traveling for long periods of time, accommodation can sometimes, most of the time, actually be the most expensive part of the trip, besides, the transportation, the airfare, stuff like that. So there are so many ways actually to go about couch surfing. And, I had a great conversation on the podcast with Alex, who was a couch surfer that I met in Mexico, who uses the actual Couchsurfing app to host and to couch surf. And then I also talked with G on our Lonely Travel episode about like the different social media groups that she uses, maybe not potentially to be couch surfing, but to be connecting with people online, which also could potentially lead to staying with people that you connect with there on like different platforms and different online groups. So couch surfing can pretty much be something that's born online, but it also is something that can be born in person. So believe it or not, people were actually couch surfing before the Couchsurfing app came about. It didn't just pop out of thin air and people were like, oh, staying on a couch. I never thought of that before. So kind of the old-fashioned way of couch surfing is something I'm going to kind of hop into a little bit more today, because that is pretty much how I ended up traveling through couch surfing this summer. And I also want to preface kind of going into this episode that, everyone's definition, everyone's experience with couch surfing is and will be different. Speaking for myself as a woman and a lot of the conversations that I've had with, my male friends who are also couch surfers, they're different. They're different experiences, different things you have to look out for. I have an episode that I recorded with Sherry a long time ago about, safety while traveling. If you want to check that out and look into a little bit more of the safety practices that I hold when I travel, you are so more than welcome to do that. Reach out to me if you have any other questions. But for example, I met a guy in Israel who is a couch surfer. He travels all the time and uses the Couchsurfing app to do that. So he will go to a place, hop on the app, find a bed to sleep in, and it's awesome. It's simple. He's made a lifestyle out of it. Me, on the other hand, every single trip I've taken, I've downloaded the Couchsurfing app and not actually ever gone through with using it. So, maybe that's now and I'll feel more comfortable in the future doing that. Maybe not, we'll see. But like I said, there are so many different ways to do it, so many different comfort levels. So, there is no golden rule, hard and dry. Hard and dry. I don't even know if that's a real thing I can say. Hard and fast. There we go. Hard and fast, rule for couch surfing. But yeah, so the way that I kind of exercised trying out couch surfing this summer, on kind of a more long-term level, I'd kind of done it meeting people, staying with people, having family, friend connections here and there. But this was the first time I was consistently kind of hopping from couch to couch for a long period of time. So for about a month. And I told you guys last episode I went to Israel. I met up with my best friend who had been living there at the time. And I told her, girl, I don't have any plans. I'm excited to see you. I'm excited to travel with you again. Let's do it. And so I kind of just surrendered a bit to the flow of what she was going to come up with. And this is what ended up happening. So she had a lot of connections, whether pretty shallow or deeper connections with, people that she'd met through her studies there, people that she'd met through her travels around Israel, and through a lot of festivals that she had gone to. So she just started hitting people up, which is kind of a crazy concept to me, but she really just started hitting people up and, asking. And so we ended up, we started in Jerusalem. We stayed with some people in Jerusalem, moved to Tel Aviv. We got to stay with some people in Tel Aviv, ended up connecting with a high school friend that was living up north, and we ended up staying with her for a bit as well. And so when I say we were really living day to day, couch to couch, I super mean that. You always have that fallback of if this doesn't work out and we don't have a couch, we will find accommodation, we will stay at a hostel, we'll figure something out. But it was kind of this adventure mindset of no, we're gonna figure it out. And we did. But the really kind of interesting part for me was I was kind of back burner on this plan. Like I said, I was kind of coming in. I didn't know anyone in Israel pretty much at that point. And so I was putting myself in her hands saying, you're gonna do your thing, get on your connections. You said you have connections. Let's see what you got. And so kind of watching from a background perspective on how she handled this was super interesting to me. And I kind of want to go into a little bit more now about this idea of assumptions, because a lot of these people that we were staying with, my friend David didn't actually know them all that well. Maybe she knew their friend, maybe she had met them a couple times, maybe once or twice, and they connected. So I have a ton of people like this through my travels. Probably you do too, where you've met someone and you're vibing, you're hitting it off, and they're like, oh, I'm from blah, blah, blah. And you're like, that's so cool. I've always wanted to go to blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh my gosh, if you ever come to blah, 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 hit me up. And I'm like, yeah, cool. We'll connect, whatever. I have not really hit people up to do that. I haven't ended up in a lot of places yet where I have those connections, and maybe I will now after seeing what happened with my friend. But I kind of came in with this assumption of like, yeah, people say things, but they don't really mean it. And she kind of just pushed past that and was like, they offered me a place to stay. If I'm ever in, Jerusalem, I'm going to ask them. And so she did. And what ended up happening was, obviously some people said no. Most of the reasons were like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm out of town, blah, blah, blah. If that was a lie, honestly, who cares? If someone is not wanting to host you, that is totally okay. But more times than not, what so surprised me was people were so enthusiastic to say yes. And, we came and we were a guest in their home and a guest on their couch, quite literally. Which, like I said, was so surprising to me how many people actually were willing to kind of go through with that offer. And I think that that is something that I'm definitely going to take going forward, is if you make a connection with someone, whether that be trying to, hit them up later for a place to stay or just reconnecting with that person or whatever, even if you feel like it was a pretty shallow connection, do it. What is the worst that can happen in that situation is that they will think you're weird for reaching out to them, or maybe not remember you, and whatever, you kind of move on with your life. So I am going to kind of take that practice and start using it a little bit more about, not making assumptions about how people are going to react or respond before even giving them the opportunity to do this. And obviously, there are so many safety practices and different ways and, contexts in which this may or may not feel okay for you. But as a rule, try and take some of these assumptions out. At least this is something that I'm going to start practicing as well, going forward with my travels and with the connections that I make, because even if you just met someone once and it feels like a shallow connection, there's always opportunity to connect with that person again, whether you're in their country, in their city, in their home now, getting to know a person on a deeper level that you initially thought was really cool and having a free place to stay. And so this is how we literally traveled through Israel, spending, I'm not even kidding you, I know that I always say that my travels end up being cheaper than I expected them to be, which is kind of a weird, rare thing, I think, for a lot of people. But with Israel, this kind of hit a new level of cheap, which was actually insane to me, because when you're not paying anything for accommodation, your costs go way down, way down, because at the same time, you're not paying for accommodation, but you're also now a guest in someone's home. And so kind of instead of going out to dinner potentially all the time, you're living the life a little bit, or you can be living the life that they're living, which includes, cooking, which was another amazing part of Couchsurfing. We ended up cooking a ton of insane Israeli food and learning how to cook. We'd go to the shuk, we'd go to the markets, and we would buy fresh produce, fresh food, bring it back, and whoever was hosting us, more times than not, we would cook it with them, learn to cook, and kind of have more of a homey experience in a place as opposed to kind of a more tourist experience, which I'm going to go down to later in the episode, kind of talking about the awesome things about Couchsurfing and, some of the not so awesome things about doing it for a long period of time. But yeah, so this idea of meeting someone and hitting them up, try practicing this, maybe not on a level of trying to stay with them yet, but don't make assumptions about how people are going to respond before giving them the opportunity to do that. So like I said, like we had this high school friend who I probably maybe talked to once in high school. Dava had a little bit more of a connection with her. And we ended up getting to stay at the place that she worked. She hosted these really cool like tours. And we got to be a part of all these tours for free and stay with her in like kind of this hostel setting for free in this beautiful place, and connect with someone that I didn't initially connect with so much in high school. So like everything kind of leads to another thing when you're couch surfing, and you just kind of have to allow that flow to kind of start moving. Like I said, we ended up couch surfing for about a month, on and off, like pretty much straight for a month, which was honestly kind of exhausting. Like I said, I'm gonna go into that a little bit more in a sec. But that kind of also means that the planning aspect of it has to, it can be kind of as loose or as strong as you want. We kind of found that, you initially come with the ask of staying, a certain period of time, whatever you feel comfortable with, however well you know this person, coming with that ask of like, hey, like, blah, 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 I'd love to stay, a night or two. If you super vibe with that person, maybe you stay longer. Maybe they invite you to come up somewhere else with them. Or maybe the night or two is perfect and you move on. So it's awesome to have those connections, and awesome, like I said, we were literally living couch to couch as we were going. But one of the biggest pros by far was the fact that it was so cheap. Because accommodation keeps getting more and more expensive. I literally cannot believe it. Oh my gosh. So that was awesome. But the other huge pro that I found at couchsurfing in Israel was like the cultural connections aspect of it. Because like I said, we were cooking, we were like hanging out with people less than like going out and like seeing things. We were being shown things. We were kind of connecting and living in a sense. Like the lives we were living were super short, but we were still living in these cities, in these areas, with locals, which in itself was really cool. We got to go on a lot of cool outings, hop in on a lot of different plans, introduced to other friends, which always kind of leads to more like opportunities. The big thing that I have to say about that is like, again, with the assumptions, like you have to kind of ask a bit more. Like with asking to stay with people, when you reach out with friends, like there were times where David would be like, hey, like we're planning on going to blah, blah, blah. Like, do you know of anyone who's there that we could potentially, meet, stay with, have someone to show us around? And you kind of just go from there. And kind of the cons, or maybe the harder part of couch surfing for a longer period of time that I found was this idea that you are always now a guest in someone's home. So where it was awesome to be able to, be like living with locals, cooking with people, being in a home, honestly, is really awesome, especially when you're getting homesick or when you're like needing a feel for home wherever you are, and getting to stay in someone else's home can really just like, okay, bring back some of that grounding sense to the craziness that traveling for long periods of time can be. But that also comes with being a guest, and you are now a guest in someone else's home. So for me, at least, I kind of always felt like I was needing to like be a little bit be a good house guest, like make it worth it for them in a way, because they're allowing you to stay for free in their house. So where like you're kind of realizing like I don't have any privacy, this person also is like giving up some of their privacy to let you stay in their home. So it was always this idea of like, oh, can I, get them more things? Can I be a better guest? How can I, be more accommodating? And that can be exhausting, having to kind of like, oh, if they work from home, make sure you're out by this time, exchange of keys, making sure that you're, there's like a lot of little things that go into being a guest in someone's home that you wouldn't have to think about if you were paying for your own accommodation, staying in a hotel, staying in a hostel, that are different than staying in someone's home. And yeah, like I said, the privacy thing, you don't really have it, especially if you're staying on someone's couch. You are just out in the living room. And so in that sense, it did get pretty exhausting. For someone who likes my alone time and likes to like kind of be on my own sometimes, have privacy, have a longer shower or more time in the bathroom, you kind of have to compromise on that a bit in order to make sure that you are kind of like not trying to intrude as much as possible, at least in my sense of how I felt as a house guest, constantly couch surfing in people's homes. But pretty much the long story short is that my experience couch surfing this summer was amazing. It was incredible. I will definitely be doing it more. I don't know that I would do it for more than a couple weeks straight because, like I said, it does get kind of stressful if this was like we kind of almost made a game out of it. We did make a game out of it, essentially, of like, how long can we go couch surfing, straight, like not paying for accommodation. Let's see what we can do, always with that back plan B of like, we will stay in accommodation if we have to. And it came up where like when we were in Italy, which is a whole different story that we'll get into later in another episode, was like, there are times where you just have to accept it. It's not going to happen and pay for accommodation. But couch surfing was an amazing experience. Like I said, I will be doing it again. And it just, we ended up doing so many crazy things, making so many crazy connections. So like a lot of the people that my friend Dava and we ended up couch surfing with were from this kind of gathering festival thing that she had gone to in Israel and met a bunch of amazing people who was pretty much a lot of the people who we ended up traveling with. We ended up going to, I guess this will be an interesting little sneak peek into how the heck we ended up from Israel to Italy. We ended up going to another one of these gatherings up north, in the north of Israel, and it was amazing. We loved it. We loved the people, and this was our first time. We got a tent, and we were camping up there for a few days and learned about another festival, like another gathering that was happening in Italy. And kind of our plan was already to go to Italy. And so this was kind of a perfect kind of like segue into that trip, was like, okay, we are going to go to this gathering, camping with like these awesome people in Italy. Chandra's gonna learn Italian. It's gonna be awesome. And so at the end, we ended up flying to Italy. And I came in now with an assumption. Like I said, stop. I'm more talking to myself than anyone right now. Stop making that assumption. I came in with this assumption of like, wow, we met all these amazing people in Israel. We couch surfed with them. It was great. Let's do it again, but Italy style. And that super did not end up happening for a multitude of reasons. But that was how we ended up in Italy. Was initially we flew into the north to Turin for this gathering, like this camping kind of festivities thing up in the Alps, which were absolutely amazing. We'll kind of go into that more in the next episode. But couch surfing was the plan for a lot of Italy as well, because we had had such awesome experiences doing it in Israel, and it didn't happen. We couch surfed once in Italy, pretty randomly, that we were not expecting to, which ended up being an awesome experience in itself. But Italy was a whole different ballpark with a whole different mode of travel, where I was telling you again, no hostels. This was the summer of absolutely no hostels. So, yeah, as we kind of head into the next episode, which will be coming out in 2 Sundays, you're gonna hear a little bit more about Italy now, and about kind of when couchsurfing didn't work out and we realized how expensive accommodation in Italy was this summer. You know, all we really had were 2 backpacks and a tent. So stay tuned for next episode, where we kind of go into the adventure. I spent about 5 weeks in Italy, the majority of them in a tent. So stay tuned for that one, because recapping that experience is going to be kind of a crazy adventure for both of us. But yeah, thank you for tuning into this episode today. If you have any more questions about my experiences couchsurfing, hit me up on Instagram at Sunshine Dime Podcast. Like I said, and hopefully as you're looking at me speaking to you right now, either on Spotify or on YouTube, check out our YouTube, because we are officially up and running with video podcasts. And wherever else you are listening to this podcast, make sure that you have your notifications turned on so you do not miss another episode, especially next week, as we are coming into recapping living in a tent in Italy. Oh my gosh, what does that even mean? I still honestly don't know what to tell you, but we're gonna figure it out next week. So, until next time.